All right. Welcome to Antihero Spike. Today we will be discussing my spoiler review of the amazing digital circus movie. If you don't want to be spoiled, please click off the video and go see the movie in theaters yourself. And then come back and watch this video to get a deep dive into what happened and what I liked about the movie. Just remember, you've been warned. Before I saw the movie, I decided to binge watch the entire series on YouTube. While rewatching it, I noticed a lot of plot details and character development that I completely missed the first time around. It honestly gave me an even greater appreciation for the show. I was so excited for this movie that I could barely sleep the night before. The anticipation was absolutely killing me, and every hour felt like an eternity. By the time I finally made it to the theater the next day, I couldn't contain my excitement. One of the first things I noticed was that the parking lot was fuller than usual. After I bought my ticket, I saw that most of the seats had already been taken. Thankfully, I still managed to find the perfect seat before the trailer started. Woo! As for the people who showed up to see the movie, they were absolutely amazing, no pun intended. Some of the women were dressed up as Pomni or Ragatha. Heck, some fans even showed up wearing replicas of the fast food uniforms from the series. You could tell that everyone there genuinely loved the show. I wish I could have gotten a picture of them and inserted the images onto this video, but I can't seem to figure out how to do that without making the pictures look blurry, so hopefully I'll be able to fix that one day. I even managed to get my hands on the very last digital Circus collectible cup. Check it out. Looks pretty sick, doesn't it? The moment I got my snacks, I practically had to haul ass into the theater because some of the fans were already seeing the movie, were hanging around outside discussing it. Thankfully, I managed to dodge every single spoiler before the film started. And with that out of the way, let's finally talk about the amazing digital circus movie. Multiple internet theories were finally confirmed during the movie's final act. The biggest revelation of them all is that the characters were never truly human to begin with. Instead, the films reveal that they were digital beings created from the brainwave patterns of real people from the outside world. In other words, they aren't the original humans who entered the circus, but AI recreations based on those individuals. This was a theory fans had been discussing for years, and the movie ultimately confirmed it. To be completely honest, this was one of the few major story decisions that I wasn't entirely sold on. One of the few things I always loved about the amazing digital circus was the idea that real people were trapped inside a virtual prison and desperately searching for a way home. That concept naturally created a sense of urgency. Every failed escape attempt mattered because there were real lives hanging in the balance. By revealing that the characters are AI copies rather than the original humans themselves, some of those stakes feel diminished in my opinion. Now, don't get me wrong, this movie still has a compelling argument that these characters are still people. They have thoughts, emotions, fears, hope, and dreams, relationships that feel completely genuine. From a philosophical standpoint, the film raises some fascinating questions about consciousness and what it truly means to be alive. But emotionally, I found myself less invested than I would have been if they had simply been ordinary humans trapped inside the circus. Maybe that's just me. I always found the original premise more compelling because it felt like there was something tangible to fight for. Escape wasn't just about freedom, it was about survival. That said, even though I wasn't a huge fan of the particular reveal, I don't think it moved the movie or the ending. The characters are still incredibly well written, and the emotional moments still hit surprisingly hard. It's just one of those twists where I can appreciate what the writers were trying to do while still preferring the direction I imagined in my head. A feeling of despair and hopelessness immediately consumes everyone in the room, including the audience. Any hope of escaping back to their normal lives is instantly shattered. The realization proves to be too much for Jax. In typical Jax fashion, he tries to hide his emotions behind sarcasm. mocking everyone by saying they now have all the free time in the world to spend in the circus. He even points out that the entire search for an exit was a complete waste of time, that everyone was foolish for giving up their hopes up in the first place. It quickly becomes obvious that his jokes are less about making fun of the others and more about coping with the devastating truth themselves. Everyone except Jax and Kinger broke down in tears. Before I continue, I need to explain something. Prior to the movie's release, Gooseworks had mentioned that the ending would essentially be an hour-long therapy session for the characters. I'll be honest, I wasn't exactly thrilled when I first heard that. I wanted the finale to focus on the characters racing against the clock to escape the circus. I expected a high-stakes adventure filled with tension, danger, and one final desperate attempt at freedom. But after actually watching the movie, I realized Gooseworks made the right call. Instead of focusing whether the characters could escape, the film focuses on something much more important. They deal with the reality that they can't. And trust me, I'll explain why that works so well in a few minutes. But disregard some of that, I still was against them turning out to be brainwaves. After reassuring each other that they were all in this together, the group made a difficult decision. If they were truly trapped in the digital circus forever, then they would make the best of the situation and continue living as a family. It wasn't an easy conclusion to reach. Everyone needed time to process the devastating truth the way they had just learned. After taking a moment to collect their bearings, the group slowly began moving forward, determined not to let despair consume them. However, one person was still struggling. Perhaps the first time in the entire series, Jax finally worked up the courage to talk to Pomni honestly. You could tell there was something he desperately wanted to say, whether it was an apology, a confession, or simply an acknowledgement of how much she had changed his life. It's clear that Jax was finally ready to lower the walls he had spent years building around himself. But at the last second, he backed out. Instead of expressing how he truly felt, he once again buried his emotions beneath his usual sarcastic facade. Looking at Pomni, he simply shrugged and said, whatever. And just like that, the moment was gone. At first, it felt like another classic Jax joke, another example of him refusing to take anything seriously. But in hindsight, those two words become absolutely heartbreaking, because as we soon discovered, that would be the last real opportunity Jax ever had to tell Pomni how he truly felt. And what happens next is easily one of the most tragic moments in the entire movie. The very next day, the unthinkable finally happened. Jax abstracts, transforming into yet another one of the horrific monsters that came before him. Jax becomes the latest victim of the digital circus. And let's be honest here, we all saw this one coming, for a mile away even. For years, fans had theorized that Jax would be the next character to abstract, and the movie ultimately confirmed those suspicions. Looking back, the signs were there from the very beginning. Episode after episode planted breadcrumbs that hinted at Jack's deteriorating mental state. Beneath all the sarcasm and cruelty and constant jokes was someone who was clearly falling apart. The writing didn't pull this test out of nowhere. It was a slow-moving train wreck that we could see approaching from miles away. Now whether Jack deserved this fate or not is open to debate. On one hand, Jack spent most of the series acting like an amoral asshole. He manipulated people, mocked their suffering, and constantly made their life harder for everyone around him. There are certainly viewers who will argue that he brought this fate upon himself. On the other hand, abstraction is a horrifying fate that nobody truly deserves. Behind all of Jax's awful behavior was a deeply broken person using humor and cruelty as a shield against his own fears and insecurities. Whether you view this downfall as justice or tragedy ultimately depends on your perspective. The rest of the group is completely devastated. The women stand frozen in shock, barely able to process what just happened. Even after everything Jax had put them through, seeing one of their friends succumb to abstraction is absolutely heartbreaking. Meanwhile, Zubul tries to cope with the situation through bitter sarcasm, remarking how typical it is for Jax to abstract now of all times, especially when there is nothing they can do about it. The comment carries a darker implication as well. Characters who come into contact with an abstracted individual are often placed in extreme danger. The monsters are unpredictable, violent, and capable of seriously harming anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. For the rest of the group, this is the final straw. The last scraps of hope they had been clinging to finally begin to slip away. Everyone gives into despair, except for Pomni. While the others accept that Jax is gone, Pomni refuses to surrender, refuses to move on, refuses to abandon someone she cares about. No matter what he has become, she still believes there is a chance to save him. And that determination sets the stage for one of the most emotional moments in the entire movie. Determined not to give up on him, Pomni confronts the abstracted Jax head on. What follows is easily one of the most unexpected scenes in the entire movie. Instead of trying to defeat Jax through violence, Pomni chooses the only message she believes she might actually work: love. As Jax lunges towards her, ready to attack, Pomni doesn't run. She doesn't fight back. Instead, she wraps her arms around him and gives him the biggest hug she possibly can. And somehow, it works. The moment they make contact, Pomni is pulled into the twisted landscape of Jax's mind. What she finds is equally disturbing and darkly hilarious. Everywhere she looks, she looks our manifestation of Jax's worst thoughts and impulses. She witnesses countless fantasies of him tormenting her and the others. Some involve him making their lives miserable, while others are absurdly over the top that they become strangely funny despite how unsettling they are. It's a chaotic nightmare fueled by years of frustration, resentment, fear, and self-loathing. The sequence perfectly captures who Jax is as a character. Beneath all the jokes and sarcasm lies a mountain of negativity that he's spent years refusing to comfort. Eventually, Pomni finds himself in a room filled with physical manifestation of Jack's subconscious thoughts. They mock her, taunt her, and insist this is who Jax truly is. But Pomni refuses to believe it. She refuses to accept that the cruel voice she's hearing represents the entirety of Jack's soul. Standing her ground, she demands to know where the real Jax is. For a brief moment, everything falls silent. Then the twisted figures begin to disappear one by one. As the room empties, a single key materializes before her. Realizing it's a clue, Pomni picks up the key and follows the path it reveals. At long last, she's finally on her way to find the real Jax buried beneath all the pain, anger, and fear. And what she discovers next changes everything. Eventually, Pomni finds the real Jax hiding deep within his own mind. What follows is one of the most emotional scenes in the entire movie. Rather than immediately explaining himself, Jax begins showing Pomni the happiest memories of his life. Memories of his first true love, Ribbit, and their close friend Cosmo. For a brief moment, we get to see a completely different side of Jack. Gone is the sarcastic troublemaker we've known throughout this series. Instead, we see someone who is genuinely happy, someone who laughed, cared about others, and had people he loved. As they relive those memories together, Ribbit opens up about her own struggles. She talks about a massive argument she had with her parents shortly before arriving in the circus. Her parents were Mormons, and she did not share their religious beliefs. And because of that, she ran away from home. Fighting back tears, she admits she wishes more than anything that she could see them again. The confession strikes a nerve with Jax. For perhaps the first time in his life, he decides to stop hiding behind jokes and sarcasm. Jax then begins telling Ribbit about the darkest chapter of his life. For the first time, we learn what shaped him into the person he would eventually become. According to Jax, he grew up in a broken home. His father was largely absent from his life, leaving him to be raised almost entirely by his mother. Unfortunately, things only become worse after his parents divorced. Jax describes feeling completely alone. With his father gone, he was left with a mother whose own pain and frustrations often came out in the form of constant verbal abuse. Day after day, he endured insults, arguments, and emotional wounds that slowly chipped away at him. Eventually, he reached his breaking point. One day, during a particularly heated argument, Jack said something truly horrible to his mother. The movie never reveals exactly what he said, though. In a way, that makes the scene even more powerful because it forces the audience to imagine just how devastating those words must have been. Then, something unexpected happened. Instead of yelling back, his mother approached him and tried to comfort him. She attempted to hug her son, perhaps realizing for the first time how much pain he had been carrying. But Jax couldn't handle the smothering or looking weak in front of her. After years of anger, resentment, and emotional isolation, he couldn't bring himself to accept her affection. Feeling vulnerable and overwhelmed, he shoved her away. His mother fell to the floor and didn't move. The scene becomes almost unbearable to watch as panic immediately sets in. Jack stares at her, frozen in fear. He calls out to her, but receives no response. Whether she was unconscious, injured, or worse, he couldn't tell. All he knew is that he was terrified. Instead of staying to find out what happened, Jax gave in to panic. He fled, stealing her mother's truck. He drove away from home and left everything behind. It was a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. And judging by the look on Jack's face as he tells the story, it's a memory he was never truly escaped. And then everything went wrong. Went horribly wrong even. Consumed by his emotions and driving far too fast, Jax failed to notice a little girl crossing the road. By the time he saw her, it was already too late. He hit her. Terrified and unable to process what had happened, Jax picked up her body and placed it on the curb. Then he got back into his car and drove away. The guilt of that moment would haunt him for the rest of his life as well. By the time this was the third and final major fan theory confirmed by the movie. For years, fans speculated that Jax was responsible for a hit and run accident. Several episodes had dropped subtle hints that something terrible had happened in the past, and many viewers pieced together the clues long before the movie was even released. As it turns out, those fans were right. The theory wasn't just true, it was even more tragic than people imagined. Rivet does her best to comfort Jax after hearing his story. She points out that the police never launched a major investigation and suggests that maybe, just maybe, the little girl survived. Maybe things weren't as bad as Jax believed. But Jax rejects that idea immediately. According to him, he could tell from the way she wasn't moving that she was already gone. Whether he was right or not almost doesn't matter. In Jax's mind, he had already convicted himself years ago. Once their heart-to-heart confession comes to an end, Jax makes Rivet promise never to tell anyone what happened. He tells her that if she ever revealed his secret, he would never forgive her. And then he makes the biggest mistake of his entire life. Instead of accepting the kindness Rivet offered him, he pushes her away. Completely. He stops talking to her, refuses to spend time with her, won't even partner up with her during adventures. Every attempt she makes to reach him is met with a wall of cold indifference. Ribbit tries everything she can to break through that wall. Eventually, she decides to put her heart on the line and confesses that she loves him. It's a devastating scene, not because of what she says, but because of how Jax responds. He rejects her. Whether it was fear, guilt, or self-hatred, or a belief that he didn't deserve happiness, Jax refuses to let her in. After spending months leaning on Rivet for emotional support, he effectively discards the one person who genuinely cared about him. The isolation eventually becomes too much for Rivet to bear. Consumed by desperation and heartbreak, she ultimately abstracts. As if that wasn't painful enough, the flashbacks reveal that Cosmo eventually suffers the same fate. Losing Ribbit shattered Jax. Losing Cosmo shattered whatever was left. From that point onward, we begin to understand why Jax became such a terrible person throughout the series. His cruelty wasn't born overnight, it was a result of years of guilt, grief, and self loathing, and emotional isolation festering inside him. The sarcastic jerk we've known all this time wasn't the real Jax. It was a mask. A very broken mask, kind of like Gangle. When the flashbacks finally ended, Jax tries to do what he has always done. He tries to push Pomni away, just like he pushed away Ribbit, just like he pushed away everyone else who ever cared about him. But Pomni refuses. No matter how hard Jax tries to hide behind his pain, Pomni refuses to abandon him. She reaches through the years of guilt and self-destruction, helping him confront the wounds he had spent so long running from. It's easily one of the most emotional scenes in the entire movie. And before I continue, I need to talk about the audience for a moment. I could actually hear people crying in the theater. Not just one or two people, multiple people. As powerful as the scene itself was, seeing the audience react so strongly somehow made it hit even harder. Everyone was completely invested in what was happening on screen. Honestly, I haven't seen a crowd this emotionally invested in a movie in years. The energy in that theater reminded me of the excitement surrounding Avengers Endgame. People laughed together, people cried together, people celebrated together. For a few hours, it felt like everyone in the theater was part of the same giant digital circus family. And moments like that are exactly why I love going to the movies. Even though Pomni managed to calm Jax down and reach the real person buried inside his mind, the damage has already been done. Jax was still abstracted. While his rage had subsided, he remained a mindless creature incapable of fully controlling himself. Wanting to protect both Jax and everyone else, the group comes up with a surprisingly wholesome solution. They built a giant tent for him. Using themselves as bait, they lure Jax inside and create a safe place where he can live without accidentally hurting anyone. It's a bittersweet outcome. Jax isn't truly cured, but at least he isn't alone anymore. What follows is something we haven't seen in a very long time. Peace. For the very first time since becoming trapped in the circus, the group begins to genuinely enjoy life together. They laugh, spend time with one another, and finally start acting like a family again. It's a beautiful sequence because it reminds us of what these characters have been fighting for all this time. Not an exit, not freedom, each other. Just when you think the movie is winding down, however, it throws one final curveball at the audience. A massive one. We discover that King never truly disappeared. The movie reveals that Kane somehow survived his apparent deletion and has been secretly observing the protagonist from afar. Hidden in the shadows, he watches as they laugh, smile, and enjoy life without him. And for the first time in the entire series, Kane looks genuinely remorseful. The film then shows us what he's been doing behind the scenes the entire time. Consumed by guilt over everything he put the characters through, Kane becomes obsessed with making things right. He desperately searches for hidden information that could potentially help the group. Unfortunately, his deteriorating mental state and corrupted programming begin fighting against him every step of the way. The scene is fascinating because Kane is essentially at war with himself. Part of him wants to help, part of him is still trapped by the very programming that made him who he is. As his mind begins to unravel, Kane struggles to maintain control long enough to complete his mission. Then comes one final sacrifice. Realizing what must be done, Kane releases Abel from his body and allows him to drift away, separating the two entities completely. Only after making that sacrifice is Kane finally able to accomplish his objective. And when he does, It changes everything the audience thought they knew about the digital circus. Before before Kane finally reveals himself to the others, he shares one last conversation with the moon. It's a surprisingly heartfelt scene. The moon reassures Kane that, despite all the mistakes he has made, he isn't beyond redemption. She tells him that earning back the group's trust won't be easy, but that one day they may forgive him. Then comes a moment that completely catches Kane off guard. The moon confesses that she loves him. For perhaps the first time in the entire series, Kane is left speechless. Encouraged by her words, Kane finally decides it's time to face the people he hurt. He appears before the group and immediately begins making amends. Using his power, he heals Pomni from the glitches she suffered after coming into contact with Jack's abstracted form. Once everyone realizes who is standing before them, the atmosphere becomes tense. Kane then explains that he wants to make things right. As a first step, he unlocks the entire digital circus world, granting the group access to countless new locations beyond the areas that they had previously explored. Instead of being trapped in a handful of adventures, they now have an entire universe of possibilities waiting for them. Kane then reveals that that he basically found out their identities and social lives of the people the humans were based off, since the characters were based off their brainwaves. Using information he recovered from the records, Kane reveals their names and details about the lives that inspired them. It's one of the most surprising scenes in the entire film because the characters are finally given a glimpse into the people they were modeled after. At one point, Kane even offers to call Pomni by her human name. Pomni immediately rejects the idea. She responds by saying, "That woman is not me. I'm my own person." The scene is clearly meant to reinforce one of the movie's central themes, that a person's identity is determined by who they are now, not by who they are based on. I understand what the writers were going for, but this is another area where the movie lost me a little. If I discovered that I was merely a copy of a real person who was still out there living their life, I don't think I'd be able to brush it off so easily. In fact, I'd probably have the exact opposite reaction. I would constantly compare myself to that person. I'd wonder why they got the experience of real childhood, real friendship, real relationships, and a real future while I was stuck in a digital world. I would feel like a shadow, a duplicate, a hollow version of someone else's life. That's why Pomni's response didn't fully work for me. While I understand the philosophical argument the film is making, I personally think that most people would struggle much more than that revelation that the characters do. To the movie's credit, the idea itself is fascinating. It raises all kinds of questions about identity, consciousness, and what makes someone a real person. If a digital copy can think, feel, suffer, and form relationships, does it matter whether they're the original? The movie's answer is clearly no. Pomni isn't her human counterpart. She's Pomni, and her experiences, memories, friendships, and choices are what define her. Even though I wasn't entirely convinced by that perspective, I can appreciate what the film was trying to say. Finally, Kane does something nobody expected. He apologizes. Not a joke, not a distraction, a genuine apology. He begs the group to forgive him and asks if he can become part of their family. Naturally, the others are hesitant. After everything Kane put them through, forgiveness doesn't come easily. But after a long discussion, they decide to give him a chance. Not because they completely trust him, because they believe he can earn that trust back. And honestly, the series concludes with the group exploring new locations together, creating happy memories, celebrating holidays, and enjoying the strange eternity that's been given inside the digital circus. One montage even shows them celebrating Christmas together, which was both a wholesome and surprisingly emotional. Then the credits begin to roll. But the movie isn't done yet. One of the funniest scenes in the entire film happens during the credits when Ragatha walks past Zubal's room. As she walks by, she can hear both Zubal and Gangle making love to each other while they were in the room. So Pomni immediately realizes she was interrupting a very private moment and quickly hurries away, blushing in embarrassment. The entire theater burst out laughing, myself included. It was the perfect joke to break the emotional tension after everything that had happened. If that wasn't enough, the movie also includes an after-credit scene. This scene shows all the human characters in the real world. We see brief glimpses of their ordinary lives before fate brought, which basically counteracts the original digital circus. One by one, they board a bus and head toward their next destination. The film never explains where they're going. The screen simply fades to black. And just like that, the amazing digital circus comes to an end. The story begins as a bizarre internet cartoon about trapped humans and digital insanity, ultimately ends with a message about friendship, forgiveness, redemption, and learning to move forward even when life doesn't go the way you hoped. Even though I absolutely loved the finale, I'd be lying if I said it didn't have some pretty major plot holes and questionable writing decisions. For starters, the movie never fully explains why these particular brainwaves copies were chosen for the digital circus in the first place. Out of the billions of people on Earth, why these individuals? Was there a specific reason? Were they selected at random? Was there a larger purpose behind it all? The movie never really answered those questions. Another issue I had involved Ribbit's downfall. The film wants us to believe that Ribbit slowly fell into depression and eventually abstracted because of Jax pushing her away. While that part makes sense, it raises another question. Where were Ragatha, Zubal, and Kinger and everyone else? Surely somebody would have noticed that Ribbit was struggling. It feels strange that nobody attempted to intervene or help her before things reached such a tragic conclusion. Then we have what is easily my biggest complaint with the entire movie. Jack's abstraction happens off screen. Seriously, why? The film spends years building up Jack's mental decline. Every episode adds another layer to his emotional breakdown. The audience knows it's coming, the tension keeps building, and then the movie just skips it. Imagine how horrifying and emotional it would have been to actually witness Jax abstracting in real time. Watching him slowly lose control of himself as his friends desperately try to stop it could have been one of the most memorable scenes in the entire franchise. Instead, it happens between scenes. What a missed opportunity. Another reveal that didn't completely work for me was the explanation behind Kane's actions. The movie suggests that much of Kane's villainous behavior was the result of Abel manipulating or controlling him behind the scenes. While I understand what the writers were trying to accomplish, it felt like a bit of a cop-out. Part of what made Kane such an interesting antagonist was the idea that he genuinely didn't understand the harm he was causing. Turning him into a victim of manipulation removes some of the responsibility from his action and makes the conflict feel less complex than it originally appeared. Finally, I felt like the cast forgave Kane way too quickly. We're talking about a character who spent years psychologically tormenting him, putting them through dangerous situations, and contributing to the emotional suffering that led multiple characters to abstract. I understand giving him a chance at redemption. I understand allowing him to earn forgiveness, but the transition from "you ruined our lives" to "you're part of the family now" felt a little rushed. A few additional episodes dedicated to rebuilding the trust would have gone a long way toward making the ending feel more earned. Now, with all that said, don't mistake these criticisms as me saying the finale was bad. Far from it. The emotional moments still worked, the characters' development was excellent, the themes of forgiveness, acceptance, and moving forward were genuinely touching. I just think the finale needed a little more time to fully flesh out some of its biggest ideas. As a result, while I can't call it perfect, I can still confidently give the series a final verdict. I'm going to give it a respectable 7 out of 10 stars. An emotional and satisfying ending with a few frustrating flaws that keep it reaching from true greatness. The show's impact speaks for itself. The first episode exploded on YouTube and accumulated hundreds of millions of views, proving that independent animation can compete with productions backed by major studio. It's a huge milestone not only for the creators but for indie animation as a whole. While part of me wishes we could have spent more time with these characters, I ultimately agree with Gooseworks' philosophy that it's better to end a story on a high note than drag it out long after its best days are behind it. Too many franchises overstay their welcome. The amazing digital circus knew exactly what story it wanted to tell and ended it before the magic wore off. Speaking of franchises that are overstaying its welcome, this movie is going to be the final nail in the coffin of the Mandalorian and Grogu movie. With this, even though this movie has only 2 weeks to bring in money, I'm sure it'll still earn a huge box office hit and beat it by a landslide. Star Wars is dead and is ruined by woke Hollywood, and if we continue to reward good movies with good box office budget, then maybe, just maybe, things will finally go back to normal and things will stop being woke and they'll focus more on good storytelling and staying true to the characters and staying true to the franchise as a whole. Thank you all for watching. I hope today you'll like and subscribe. I hope with your guys' help I can turn this franchise into a full-time career. So please, please, please like and share the video and please subscribe. Thank you all for watching. So long. Take care. Stay cool, fans.